Queen Celera ruled over a vast alien empire, and her palace was the grandest structure on any world her people had ever built. Its ceilings stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Its floors were polished stone that caught the light like still water. Thousands of servants, soldiers, and advisors moved through its long corridors every single day. It was a place of great power and great silence, because the queen had not smiled in over a year. Her twins were the reason. Kale and Rin were 8 years old, and they were the terror of the entire royal wing. Not because they were evil. Not because they were simply spoiled children who wanted attention. It was something deeper and darker than that. Their father, the king, had died suddenly in front of them. They had been standing right there when it happened. They had seen everything. And since that day, something inside both children had cracked wide open and never closed again. Every caretaker the queen sent was gone within days. The first one lasted 3 days before Kale locked him out of the wing entirely and refused to open the door. The second one lasted a single afternoon before Rin screamed so loudly and for so long that the woman simply packed her bag and walked out without a word to anyone. The third caretaker was a trained professional who had worked with difficult children across 6 different worlds. She lasted 2 days. On the second morning she came to the queen with tired eyes and told her quietly that she was sorry, but she could not go back in there. The queen listened to all of them without expression. She thanked them and let them go. Then she sat alone in her private room and stared at the wall for a long time. The royal staff began whispering. They said the twins were beyond help. They said the grief had made the children wild. Some of the older servants said it with pity. Some of the younger ones said it with fear. A few said both. No one wanted to go near the royal wing anymore. The wing itself began to show it. Dust gathered in the corners. Dishes sat outside the door for too long before anyone dared collect them. The long corridor that led to the twins' room grew dull and gray from neglect because none of the regular cleaning staff would volunteer to go near it. That was how Tom ended up there. Tom was not young and he was not old. He was somewhere in the middle, the kind of man people look at once and then forget because there is nothing sharp or striking about him. He had a plain face, an average build, and the kind of quiet that came not from shyness but from a life spent doing work that no one noticed. He had been a janitor in the palace for 4 years. He was good at it. He came early, stayed late, and never caused trouble. His supervisor liked him for that reason alone. When no one else would take the royal wing, the supervisor looked down his list and found Tom's name near the bottom. He called Tom in and explained the situation plainly. The wing needed cleaning. The twins were difficult. There had been incidents. Tom would need to be careful and keep his distance and not engage with the children under any circumstances. He was there to clean and nothing else. Tom listened to all of this and then nodded once and said he understood. The next morning he arrived at the royal wing with his cart. Mop, bucket, cleaning cloths, a small spray bottle, a broom. He wore his usual gray uniform. He had a small thermos of tea clipped to the side of his cart because he always brought tea. He stopped at the entrance to the corridor, looked down its long dusty length and then quietly got to work. He did not knock on any doors. He did not call out. He did not try to introduce himself or explain who he was or why he was there. He simply started at one end of the corridor and began to clean. He moved slowly and steadily. The mop went back and forth in long even strokes. The broom gathered dust from the corners without rushing. He worked the way water moves downhill, without drama, without stopping. The corridor was long and it took a good while and he did not hurry any of it. Halfway through the morning, a door opened. Tom did not look up. Kale stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He was a lean boy with sharp eyes and the kind of expression that had learned very quickly to look hard so that nothing else showed through. He stared at Tom the way a person stares at something they expect to disappoint them. Tom kept mopping. Kale waited for the man to notice him, to stop, to say something, to smile, that particular careful smile that all the adults used when they were trying to be gentle and safe. But Tom did not look up. He just kept working in slow, steady strokes like Kale was not standing there at all. A minute passed. Then another. Further down the corridor, a second door opened just a crack. One eye appeared in the gap. Rin watching. Tom reached the end of a section, wrung out his mop, moved his cart forward and started the next stretch. His thermos of tea caught the corridor light for a moment as he moved it aside. Still he did not look at either child. Kale uncrossed his arms. His expression shifted, just slightly, from hard to something more careful and uncertain. He did not speak. He did not step out into the corridor. But he also did not go back inside and close the door. He just stood there and watched. And Tom just worked. The next morning Tom came back. This surprised the staff more than anything else. The two young helpers who pushed supply carts down the outer corridors had made a quiet bet the night before that the human janitor would find some reason not to return. Most people found a reason eventually. A sore back. A scheduling conflict. A sudden transfer request. The Royal Wing had a way of making people creative with their excuses. But Tom arrived at the same time as the day before, with the same gray uniform and the same cart and the same small thermos of tea clipped to the side. He moved into the corridor without hesitation and got to work exactly where he had left off. Kale's door opened again within the hour. The boy stood in the same spot as yesterday, arms crossed, eyes sharp, watching. Tom did not look up. He worked his way down the corridor with the same slow, steady rhythm as before, the mop going back and forth, the broom collecting what the mop missed. There was no performance in it. No awareness of being watched, or at least no sign of it. When Tom reached the far end of the corridor, he stopped, wrung out his mop one final time, and began loading his cart to leave. He moved each item back into its place without rushing. Then he reached into the small front pocket of his cart and took something out. He set it on the narrow stone ledge that ran along the corridor wall, just beside the supply alcove at the end of the hall. Then he pushed his cart around the corner and was gone. Kale stared at the ledge from across the corridor. He did not move for a long time. Then, slowly he walked over. It was a bird. Folded from a single piece of pale paper, small enough to sit in a closed fist. The wings were creased at a clean angle and the beak was sharp and neat. It was the kind of thing that took practice to make well, and this one was made well. It sat on the stone ledge like it was resting before a long flight. Kale looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up and turned it over in his hands. He pressed one wing gently and watched it spring back into shape. He set it back on the ledge and walked back to his room without taking it. The door to Rin's room opened a few minutes later. Rin was quieter than her brother in every possible way. Where Kale filled a room with tension, Rin made herself small and still and easy to miss. She had dark eyes that moved quickly and noticed everything. She stepped out into the corridor, looked both ways, and then walked to the ledge. She picked up the paper bird. She turned it over the same way her brother had. Then she held it in both hands very carefully, the way you hold something you do not want to damage, and carried it back into her room. The door closed softly behind her. The next morning Tom came back and left a smooth gray stone on the same ledge. It was flat and oval and fit perfectly in the palm of a hand. One side of it was slightly shinier than the other, worn smooth by water over a very long time. It was the kind of stone that felt good to hold and did nothing else, and that was enough. Kale saw it from his doorway. He walked over, picked it up, felt the weight of it, set it back down. He stood there for a moment longer than he had the day before. Then he went back inside. Rin came out later and took the stone back to her room, the same way she had taken the bird. On the third day Tom left a small drawing on a folded piece of paper. It was a simple sketch of a tree with wide branches and a thick trunk, done in plain pencil without color. The lines were clean and confident. Below the tree in very small letters were two words: Tom's tree. Nothing else. This time Kale picked it up and did not put it back. He carried it inside with him. He did not close his door all the way. Tom noticed none of this because he was already gone by the time either child came into the corridor. He never waited to see what happened to the things he left. He left them the way someone leaves a window open on a warm day, without standing there to watch the air come in. By the end of the first week the corridor was clean and Tom had a routine. He arrived, worked, left something small on the ledge and went home. He did not tell his supervisor about the things he left. He did not mention the twins to anyone. When other staff members asked him how it was going in the Royal Wing, he said it was fine and left it at that. Kale began appearing in the doorway earlier each morning. Some days he would stand there for nearly an hour, watching Tom work from one end of the corridor to the other. He never said anything. Tom never said anything either. But the silence between them had changed from the first day. It was no longer the silence of two strangers avoiding each other. It had become something else, something with more room in it. One morning Kale stepped 2 full steps out of his doorway and into the corridor. He stopped there, feet planted, watching. Tom worked past him at a distance of about 4 steps, close enough that Kale could hear the soft sound of the mop on stone. Tom did not speed up or slow down. He did not shift away. He just moved past at the same calm pace as always. Kale stood in that spot for a long time after Tom had moved on. That afternoon Rin opened her door all the way for the first time. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Tom arrived at the Royal Wing the same way he always did. Same time, same cart, same thermos of tea clipped to the side. The corridor was quiet when he entered it, the way it always was in the early part of the morning before the palace fully woke up. He set his cart near the wall, unclipped his thermos, took one slow sip, clipped it back and picked up his mop. He had barely started when Kale's door opened. This was not unusual anymore. Kale appeared most mornings now, standing in his doorway with his arms crossed and his sharp eyes tracking Tom's movements from one end of the corridor to the other. Tom had grown used to it the same way you grow used to a bird that sits on the same fence post every morning. You stop being surprised by it. You just let it be there. But this morning was different. This morning Kale did not stay in the doorway. He walked out into the corridor. Not 2 steps like before. All the way out into the middle of the hall, and he stopped directly in Tom's path. His arms were crossed tight across his chest and his jaw was set hard and his eyes were doing that thing they did when he was working himself up to something. Tom stopped. He held his mop loosely at his side and waited. Kale stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound demanding and only halfway succeeded, "Why do you keep coming back?" Tom looked at him. Not with surprise, not with that careful soft expression that adults used when they were trying to handle something fragile. He just looked at the boy the way you look at someone who has asked you a real question. He said, "Because the corridor does not clean itself." Kale's eyes narrowed. "That is not what I mean," he said. "Everyone else left. The ones before you. All of them. They all ran. So why have you not run?" Tom was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking up an answer. The quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. Then he pulled his mop back, leaned it against the wall and sat down on the floor of the corridor. Not on a chair, not on a step. Right there on the clean stone floor, back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of him. He looked up at Kale from down there and said, "Sit down if you want to hear it." Kale stared at him. No adult in the palace had ever sat on the floor like that. It was strange enough that it moved something in the boy without his permission. He sat down. Not right next to Tom. A few feet away, back against the opposite wall, arms still crossed. Tom looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back down. He said, "I had a son once. His name was Pete. He was 6 years old and he had this way of laughing where his whole face got involved, eyes and nose and everything. He got sick. It happened fast, the way those things sometimes do. And then one morning I went to the hospital and he was gone." The corridor was very still. Tom was not performing the memory. He was not making his voice soft or sad in a practiced way. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have carried something for a long time and have made a kind of peace with the weight of it, not a happy peace, just a real one. He said, "After that I did not want to be around people for a long time. Anyone who came close felt like too much. They always wanted to say the right thing or do the right thing and none of it was right because nothing was right. I just wanted everyone to go away and leave me alone with it." Kale had uncrossed his arms without noticing. Tom said, "So I understand why you chase people off. I'm not saying it is the right thing to do. I'm just saying I understand it." Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then from down the corridor came a soft sound. Both of them looked up. Rin was standing outside her door. She had come out so quietly that neither of them had heard her. She stood very still with the paper bird held in both hands, watching them. Tom looked at her the same way he had looked at Kale. "Come. No pressure in it." He said, "You can sit too if you like. Or you can go back inside. Either way is fine." Rin stood there for another moment. Then she walked over slowly and sat down on the floor beside her brother. She did not say anything. She just sat there with the paper bird in her lap and her eyes on the floor in front of her. The three of them sat in the corridor in silence for a while. Then Kale said in a voice much smaller than his usual one, "We were there. When our father died. We were standing right there and we could not do anything." Tom nodded. He did not say, "It was not your fault." He did not say, "You were just children, what could you have done?" He had heard enough hollow comfort in his own life to know that none of it landed where it was supposed to. He just said, "That is a heavy thing to carry." Kale's throat moved. Rin pressed the paper bird a little closer to her chest. Tom did not try to fix anything. He did not wrap it up or push it toward a lesson. He just stayed there on the cold stone floor with them and let the weight of what they had said hang in the air without rushing to clear it away. Outside the tall corridor windows, the palace light moved slowly across the floor toward them. None of them moved for a long time. The day after they sat on the floor together, Tom came back. He did not mention what had happened the morning before. He did not arrive with a softer expression or a gentler voice or any sign that something between them had shifted. He came the same way he always came, same time, same cart, same thermos of tea. He moved into the corridor and began his work without ceremony, the mop going back and forth in long slow strokes the way it always did. But this morning something was different. Kale came out of his room before Tom had even reached the middle of the corridor. He did not stand in his doorway and watch from a distance. He walked straight out and stopped beside Tom's cart and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Tom. He said, "Can I do something?" Tom did not make a big moment of it. He did not smile wide or say something encouraging the way a caretaker might. He just looked at the cart, considered it for a second, and pointed to the small broom leaning against the side. He said, "Corners need doing. Dust builds up where the wall meets the floor. Work your way down that side." Cale picked up the broom. It was a little tall for him, but he adjusted his grip and moved to the nearest corner and started sweeping. He did it carefully, the way someone does a thing when they are trying to prove they can do it properly. Tom went back to mopping without another word. 10 minutes later Rin appeared. She stood at the edge of the corridor and watched her brother sweeping and Tom mopping and the quiet easy rhythm of it. Then she walked to the cart and looked at what was left. There was a small bucket of clean cloths for wiping down the ledges and window bases along the wall. She picked up a cloth without asking and went to the nearest ledge and began wiping it down. Tom glanced at her once and nodded. That was all. For a while the three of them worked in silence, each moving through their own section of the corridor. The only sounds were the mop on stone and the broom on the corners and the soft push of cloth along the ledges. It was an ordinary sound. A plain working sound. But inside it there was something that had not been in that corridor for a very long time. It felt almost peaceful. They worked their way slowly down the full length of the hall. When Cale finished his side he came back to the cart and Tom handed him a fresh task without being asked, pointing to a section of the floor near the supply alcove that needed a second pass. Cale went without a word. Rin moved from ledge to ledge with her cloth, careful and steady, stopping to fold it over when one side got too dusty. They reached the far end of the corridor together, all three of them arriving at roughly the same time, and Tom stopped and looked back down the length of the hall. It was clean. Properly clean, the way it had not been in months before he came. He said, "Good work." He said it plainly, the way someone says a true thing. Not to encourage or reward. Just because it was accurate. Cale looked down the corridor and something moved across his face. Pride, maybe, but underneath it something else. Something that came from seeing a thing that was broken and neglected become clean and cared for again. He stood very still looking at it. Rin had stopped beside one of the tall windows. The light came through it at a low angle and caught the dust still settling in the air, making it visible, all those tiny floating things that are always there but usually cannot be seen. She watched it for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "Papa used to walk down this corridor every morning." The words came out small and simple and landed in the quiet like a stone dropped in still water. Tom did not respond right away. He stood beside his cart and let the words be there. Rin said he would stop at that window. That one. And he would look out at the garden for a minute before he started his day. Every morning. Even when he was busy. He always stopped at that window. Cale had turned around. He was looking at his sister with an expression that had stopped trying to be hard. Rin said, "I did not know that was the last time I would see him do it." Her voice did not break on the words. But her hands did. The cloth she was holding fell to the floor and she looked at her hands like she was surprised to find them empty, and then the first tear came and after that she could not stop them. Cale crossed the corridor in a few steps and stood next to her, and for a moment he held himself stiff and tight the way he always did. Then something in him gave way and he put his arm around his sister and his own eyes filled and spilled over, and that was the end of the wall he had been building since the day their father died. Tom set his mop quietly against the cart. He walked over and sat down on the floor beside them, his back against the wall beneath the window their father used to stop at every morning. He did not put his arms around them or tell them it would be all right. He just sat there, solid and present and unhurried, while both children wept in a way they had not allowed themselves to since the very beginning. He stayed on that cold stone floor for a long time. 3 floors above the corridor, in a small private room filled with soft monitoring light, Queen Celera sat in front of a screen. She had been watching since Cale first picked up the broom. She had her hands folded in her lap and her back very straight the way she always sat in front of others. But her eyes were wet. And she did not call anyone. She did not send a servant or an aide or a royal physician. She just watched the screen, where a plain human janitor sat on the floor of her royal wing and stayed beside her children while they finally let themselves fall apart. She did not interrupt. She did not look away. The summons came on a Wednesday morning. Tom was halfway through his corridor when one of the Queen's personal aides appeared at the entrance to the royal wing. She was a tall woman in formal palace dress, and she carried herself the way people carry themselves when they are used to delivering important messages. She stopped at the edge of the corridor, looked at Tom, and said the Queen would like to see him. Now if possible. Tom leaned his mop against the wall. He looked down at his gray uniform, which had a faint damp patch on the left knee from where he had knelt to clean the base of the supply alcove earlier. He said, like this? The aide looked at his uniform and then looked at his face, and something in her expression softened very slightly. She said, yes. Like that is fine. Tom nodded and followed her. The Queen's receiving room was not the grand throne hall where she met dignitaries and ambassadors. It was a smaller room, quieter, with tall windows on one side and plain stone walls and 2 chairs set across from each other near the center. It felt like a room where real conversations happened, not performed once. Tom noticed that immediately when he walked in. Queen Celera was already standing when he entered. She was tall, the way most of her people were tall, with the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. She wore no crown in this room. Just plain formal clothing in deep blue. Her eyes were steady and dark, and they looked at Tom the way they had looked at the screen 3 days ago, with full attention and no distance in them. She said, please sit. Tom sat. She sat across from him. For a moment she did not speak. She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they have been trying to understand and have not quite managed yet. Then she said, I watched you. From the monitor. For most of the past 2 weeks. I want you to know that. Tom said, I thought someone might be watching. She said, and it did not change how you behaved. He said no. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, I want to thank you. Not as a queen thanks a servant. I want to thank you as a mother. What you did for my children no one else has come close to doing. Not the trained caretakers, not the royal advisors, not the physicians. You reached them when no one else could. Tom said, I did not do very much. I just showed up. The Queen said, you would be surprised how rare that is. She reached to the small table beside her chair and picked up a sealed document. She held it out toward him. She said, inside this there is a formal offer. A new title. A place on the permanent royal staff at senior level. A salary that is considerably more than what a janitor earns. A set of rooms in the palace residential wing. And a sum of gold that would allow you to live comfortably for the rest of your life without working another day if you chose not to. Tom looked at the document. He did not take it. He said, that is very generous. She said, it is the least the crown can offer. Tom was quiet for a moment. He turned his thermos over in his hands, the small one he always carried, and looked at it. Then he looked back up at the Queen. He said, I am grateful. Truly. But I would like to keep my job if that is all right. And I would like to keep coming to the wing every morning the way I have been. The Queen looked at him steadily. She said, you are refusing the offer. He said, I am asking to keep my mop. Yes. She said, why? Tom thought about it for a moment. Not because he did not know the answer, but because he wanted to say it correctly. He said, your children did not need someone above them. They did not need someone with a title or a plan or a method. They needed someone who just stayed. Who came back the next day and the day after that without making it into something. If I become a senior royal staff member with a formal role, I become another adult with authority and expectations. That is not what helped them. What helped them was that I was just the man who cleaned the corridor. The Queen looked at him for a long time. Then she said, and the gold? Tom almost smiled. He said, I have what I need. She studied his face and found nothing in it that was performing humility or waiting to be convinced otherwise. He meant it completely. She had met many people in her years as queen, and she had learned to tell the difference between a person who said a modest thing and a person who was a modest thing. Tom was the second kind. She said, very well. You keep your job. You keep your access to the wing. And the offer remains open if you ever change your mind. Tom nodded and said thank you, and that was the end of the formal part of things. He went back to the corridor that same morning and finished what he had started before the aide came for him. The mop went back and forth in long, slow strokes. The broom took care of the corners. He left a small thing on the ledge before he left, a smooth round piece of green glass, polished at the edges, the kind that looks like a piece of captured sea. 2 days later he heard something he had not heard in that corridor before. Laughter. Kale and Rin were chasing each other from one end of the hall to the other, their feet loud and careless on the clean stone floor, their voices bouncing off the high ceiling. Kale was laughing the way children laugh when they forget to hold anything back. Rin was right behind him, laughing harder. Tom stood at the far end with his cart and watched them for a moment. Then he picked up his mop and got back to work. Down the hall, on the small screen in her private room, Queen Celera watched her children run and laughed and covered her mouth with her hand and sat there quietly falling apart in the best possible way, understanding at last that the thing her children needed most had no name and no price and could not be ordered or arranged or bought. It could only be given. And a quiet man in a gray uniform had given it freely, one ordinary morning at a time.